Here is a former FBI agent who spent 28 years inside the Bureau, who knows how the FBI operates, how it processes evidence, how it makes decisions about what to release publicly and what to protect, who built her career on exactly the kind of investigative work that the Nancy Guthrie case demands. And she is disgusted. Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent, former SWAT team member, now a NewsNation contributor and the host of Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer FBI, went on her show this week and said something that nobody inside the investigation has been willing to say publicly. She said the FBI has enhanced images of the suspect, colorized images that go far beyond the pixelated black and white footage that has been in the public domain since February. Images that could allow the public to identify the person who was at Nancy Guthrie's front door at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st. And the FBI is not releasing them. She said, during her years as a law enforcement agent, the first thing she would do with video or photo evidence was have it enhanced. She described how that would help her solve cases. And then she called for the FBI to release the enhanced and colorized images to aid public identification and expressed disgust that they have not done so. Disgust. From a woman who spent 28 years inside the institution she is criticizing. Not frustration, not disappointment, disgust. This is forensic disconnect. Day 125. And today we are covering 3 developments that together describe the specific tension at the heart of this investigation, between what the FBI has and what it is choosing to show, between the image that the public has been given of the suspect and the image that enhanced technology has produced, and between what the experts are saying about what happened to Nancy and what the official communications are willing to acknowledge. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Day 125. Subscribe. Let's start with the enhanced images. Because the specific technology that Coffindaffer is referring to, and the specific reason the FBI would have it and not release it, is worth understanding in full. The FBI's forensic image enhancement capabilities are among the most advanced in law enforcement. The Bureau has dedicated units, the Forensic Audio, Video, and Image Analysis Unit, known as FAVIO, that apply specific technical processes to video and photographic evidence to improve clarity, resolution, and identification value. These processes include digital noise reduction, frame interpolation, image stabilization, resolution enhancement, and colorization of black and white footage. The Google Nest camera at Nancy's front door was a black and white device. The footage it captured, including the footage that the FBI and Google jointly recovered despite the fact that the physical device was missing and Nancy had no cloud subscription, is the black and white recording that the public has seen. The masked figure at the door, the deliberate covering of the lens with vegetation from the flower pot, the specific build and movements that behavioral analysts have spent 125 days assessing. But the FBI's FAVIO processes can do things to that footage that the original recording cannot do on its own. They can enhance resolution. They can reduce the digital noise that makes the image pixelated. They can sharpen edges. They can colorize the black and white recording using reference data, turning a grainy monochrome image of a masked figure into something substantially clearer, potentially something that allows identification of specific features, clothing colors, or equipment details that the original footage obscures. Coffindaffer says the FBI has done this work, has produced enhanced and colorized images of the suspect, and has not released them to the public. Why would the FBI withhold enhanced images of the primary suspect in the most watched missing persons case in modern American history? The answer is specific and documented in how federal prosecutions work. Enhanced forensic images produced through processing techniques are evidentiary material. They will be introduced as evidence in a trial, and in a criminal trial, the defense has the right to challenge every piece of evidence, to question the methodology, to contest the accuracy, to argue that the enhancement process has introduced artifacts that misrepresent the original recording. If the FBI releases the enhanced images publicly before any arrest, it gives potential defense attorneys a roadmap. It shows them exactly what the prosecution will have. It allows them to prepare their challenge to the enhancement methodology before the prosecution has the opportunity to present it in court for the first time. And if the enhanced images are circulated publicly, they become contaminated evidence, potentially inadmissible in court if a defense attorney can argue that the public circulation compromised the forensic chain of custody. This is the FBI's calculus. The enhanced images are evidence. Releasing them publicly may serve the goal of public identification, but at the cost of the evidentiary integrity that a prosecution requires. Coffindaffer disagrees with that calculus. Her specific argument is that the benefit of public identification, of potentially having someone recognize the suspect from enhanced colorized images that are substantially clearer than what has been released, outweighs the evidentiary risk. That the investigation has been running for 125 days without a named suspect, and that the specific capability of getting a clearer picture of the suspect into the public consciousness is worth the potential risk to the prosecution. She is a 28-year veteran of the FBI. She is making this argument about her own former employer. She is expressing disgust. That is not a word that former FBI agents use lightly about the institution they served. Now let's go to what the FBI and Google jointly recovered. Because this detail, first reported by Fox News Digital, adds a specific and significant dimension to what investigators actually have. Nancy Guthrie had a Google Nest camera at her front door. She did not have a cloud subscription for the camera, which means the footage was stored locally on the physical device rather than being uploaded to Google's servers. When investigators arrived at Nancy's home after her disappearance, the physical camera device was missing. Someone had removed it before the police arrived. The removal of the camera is the specific act of a person who knew the camera was there and who understood that it had recorded them. Not a random removal. A deliberate, targeted removal of a specific piece of evidence by someone who was aware of what it contained. But the FBI and Google teamed up to recover the footage anyway. The specific technical mechanism through which this was possible has not been fully disclosed publicly, but the result is documented. The FBI and Google working together produced recovered images from a device that had been physically removed from the scene before investigators arrived. The recovered images show the masked, armed individual at Nancy's front door on the morning of February 1st, the same footage that has been in the public domain. But the recovered images also captured something that has not been in the public domain. A masked man on Nancy's doorstep several weeks before her abduction. Not the night of the abduction, weeks before. A masked figure at Nancy Guthrie's front door, the same door where the masked figure appeared at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, weeks earlier. That earlier footage is the specific evidence that the investigation has been using to establish the character of this crime. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a planned crime, a surveilled crime. A crime where the perpetrator visited the target location multiple times before the abduction, was captured on camera at least twice, and then removed the camera before investigators could use the footage as evidence. Expert Morgan Wright, a cybersecurity analyst and former law enforcement official, connected this specific detail to the blood trail evidence. He said, "The blood trail stops at the edge of the driveway, so we know there was a car. A vehicle means possible license plate data, tire tracks, traffic camera footage, and cell tower pings. It also means the suspect had a plan to move Nancy quickly and quietly from a residential neighborhood. A plan. The prior visits are the plan. The camera removal is the plan. The vehicle at the edge of the driveway is the plan. The masked figure weeks earlier is the plan. Everything about this crime is planned. And the planning is visible in the evidence that the FBI and Google recovered from a device that someone removed to prevent exactly that." Now let's go to Barbara Butcher, because the veteran forensic investigator who spent decades at the New York City Medical Examiner's Office said something this week that is the most sobering assessment of Nancy Guthrie's likely fate that any credentialed expert has offered publicly. She said she believed Nancy likely died of shock or a medical condition shortly after being taken from her home. She said, "My second thought was that after time, when there was no valid ransom demand or any information forthcoming, that it's probably likely that Mrs. Guthrie died of shock, fright, heart disease, whatever it was, very soon after being taken from her home. And that's just horrifying to me." And then she said the part that is hardest to hold. She said that if Nancy died shortly after the abduction, if the ransom operation failed because the victim did not survive the initial trauma, then the kidnapper had nothing, and probably unfortunately took her body into the desert and buried her. Into the desert and buried her. That is not speculation from a social media commentator. That is the specific assessment of a forensic investigator who has spent decades determining how people die and what happens to their bodies. Who understands the specific physical reality of what an 84-year-old woman with an underlying cardiac condition, with a pacemaker, might experience during the trauma of a violent abduction in the middle of the night? The pacemaker went silent at 2:28 a.m. That specific detail, the cardiac device that stops transmitting when it loses connection to the Apple devices that monitor it, has been one of the central forensic puzzles of this case since February. The pacemaker can go silent because the person has moved outside Bluetooth range. It can go silent because the device is damaged. It can go silent because the person is dead. Butcher's assessment puts the pacemaker silence in a specific context that the public record has been building toward, but that no one has said this directly. The pacemaker may have gone silent at 2:28 a.m. because Nancy Guthrie died at approximately 2:28 a.m., not survived the abduction, not held captive for 125 days, died shortly after being taken. From shock, from fear, from the specific physiological response of an 84-year-old cardiac patient to violent trauma in the middle of the night. And then the kidnapper had nothing, and made decisions accordingly. John Buehler, the retired detective who spoke to Brian Enton at NewsNation, offered the specific theory about who the kidnapper likely is. He said, any tradesperson that maybe was doing plumbing repair or electrical repair, anybody who was delivering furniture, anything that came up where somebody could see her as a source of ransom because of the connection with Savannah and Savannah's notoriety. A local worker. Someone who had access to Nancy's home in the months before February 1st. Someone who saw the house, the neighborhood, the specific context of an 84-year-old woman living alone in a comfortable Catalina foothills home and made the connection to Savannah. Made the calculation that Savannah Guthrie's mother was a target. This theory is consistent with the specific evidence of the crime, the prior visits to the property, the masked figure weeks before the abduction, suggests someone with prior knowledge of the specific property. Not a random selection of a target from a neighborhood, a specific, deliberate selection of a specific house that someone had been to before, had a reason to be at before, had noted as a potential target during the course of ordinary work, a plumber, an electrician, a delivery driver, a landscaper, someone who was at Nancy's home in the legitimate course of their work in the months before February 1st, who noted what was there, who connected it to Savannah, and who came back. The enhanced images that Coffindaffer says the FBI has may show exactly this person in enough detail to identify them, and the FBI is not releasing those images. Let's hold all of this together. The enhanced images that exist but haven't been released. The prior surveillance visit caught on the recovered camera footage, the blood trail that stops at the driveway and the car that carried her away, Barbara Butcher's assessment that Nancy likely died shortly after the abduction, John Buehler's theory of a local worker who noted the house, and the desert, somewhere in the geographic radius of the Sonoran terrain around Tucson, where the answers are waiting. Day 125. The investigation has not gone cold. The forensic processes are running. The enhanced images exist. The prior visits were captured. The blockchain is permanent. The genealogy process is active. But a forensic expert who spent decades at one of the most sophisticated medical examiner's offices in the country said this week that it is probably likely that Nancy Guthrie died very soon after being taken from her home. The kidnapper had nothing and probably took her body into the desert. That is the hardest thing that has been said publicly about this case since February. And it was said by someone who has spent her career understanding exactly what happens to human beings who are subjected to exactly this kind of violent trauma. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair and blue eyes. She raised 3 children alone. She tended flower pots on her back patio. The FBI has enhanced images. The prior visit is documented. The desert may hold what it holds. And somewhere in the intersection of the genealogy process at Estrella and the blockchain trail and the 50,000 tips and the enhanced images that Coffindaffer says exist, the name of the person who did this is waiting to be found. Let me go deeper into what enhanced forensic image technology actually does. and why Coffindaffer's disgust is specifically grounded in operational experience rather than general frustration. The FBI's Forensic Audio, Video, and Image Analysis Unit has been developing and refining image enhancement capabilities for decades. The specific techniques they apply to surveillance footage go through multiple stages, each of which adds something to the original recording. The first stage is noise reduction. Digital video, particularly from consumer-grade surveillance cameras like the Google Nest, contains significant visual noise, random variation in pixel values that creates the grainy, pixelated appearance of low-resolution footage. Noise reduction algorithms distinguish between the signal, the actual visual information of the scene, and the noise, selectively suppressing the random variation while preserving the underlying image content. The result is a cleaner image that reveals detail that was always present in the recording, but was obscured by noise. The second stage is resolution enhancement. The original footage has a fixed resolution, a specific number of pixels per frame. Enhancement algorithms use multiple frames of the same scene, leveraging the slight variations in camera position and lighting that occur frame to frame, to construct a higher resolution image than any single frame contains. This process, called super-resolution reconstruction, can significantly increase the apparent detail in the image without introducing fictional elements. The third stage is colorization. For black and white footage, the FBI has developed colorization processes that apply color information based on the specific spectral characteristics of the objects in the scene. This is not guessing at colors. It is a data-driven process that uses reference information about the specific materials and surfaces in the scene to assign plausible color values to the grayscale image. The result is a colorized image that, while not a perfect reproduction of the original colors, provides substantially more information about the suspect's appearance than the black and white original. The fourth stage is subject isolation. The FBI can isolate the suspect from the background, enhance the specific areas of the image that contain the suspect's features and clothing, and produce a composite image that focuses maximum detail on the subject. This is the stage at which a black and white, pixelated image of a masked figure can become a detailed, colorized, enhanced portrait that shows the specific details of the mask, the clothing, the equipment, the build, and any identifiable features. Coffindaffer knows this process. She used it throughout her 28-year career. She knows what a fully processed FBI enhanced image looks like compared to the raw footage. And she knows that the enhanced image of the person at Nancy's door, processed through all 4 stages of the FBI's enhancement capabilities, would show substantially more than the public has seen. The specific question she is raising is, why hasn't that image been released? The legal argument for withholding is that it protects the prosecution. The operational argument for releasing it is that it could produce a public identification that breaks the case. And after 125 days without a named suspect, after 50,000 tips and 3 months of DNA analysis and blockchain tracing and genealogy work, the question of whether the enhanced image could produce the identification that the other processes have not yet produced is a legitimate and urgent one. Coffindaffer's disgust is the voice of someone who has solved cases with exactly this tool. Who knows from direct experience what happens when an enhanced, colorized image of a suspect goes public in a high-profile case? Who watched people recognize suspects from images that were substantially worse than what the FBI's full enhancement capabilities can produce? The FBI is making a calculation. Protect the prosecution. Hold the evidence. Wait for the forensic processes, the DNA, the blockchain, the genealogy, to produce the identification without needing the public to make it. Coffindaffer is making a different calculation. 125 days without a result. A family that cannot grieve. An 84-year-old woman who may have died very soon after being taken and whose body is somewhere in the desert. Release the image. Let the public help. Accept the evidentiary risk as the cost of getting the identification that breaks the case. Both calculations have merit. Both are being made by people who know what they are doing. And the specific tension between them, protection of prosecution versus public identification, is the operational heart of where this investigation stands on day 125. Now let's go to the specific significance of the recovered camera footage showing the prior visit. Because this detail, the masked figure at Nancy's doorstep several weeks before the abduction, is one of the most important pieces of evidence that has been publicly confirmed, and it has not received sufficient analytical attention. The Google Nest camera was physically removed from the scene before police arrived. Someone took it. That removal was a specific act of evidence destruction, an attempt to prevent investigators from accessing the footage it contained. The person who removed it knew the camera was there, knew what it had recorded, and made the decision to remove it to prevent the footage from becoming evidence. This specific act, removing the camera, tells you something specific about the person who did it. They had been at that property before the night of February 1st. They had observed the camera. They had noted its position and understood that it was recording. And they planned the removal of the camera as part of the operation, not an improvised response to discovering it existed, but a pre-planned element of the crime. The FBI and Google recovered the footage anyway. Whatever process they used, whether through residual data on the internal storage, through Google's server records that may have received some data even without a subscription, through some other technical mechanism, they were able to recover images that someone had tried to destroy. And those recovered images show the same masked figure, weeks before the abduction, on Nancy's doorstep. That prior visit is the reconnaissance. The crime did not begin on February 1st. It began weeks before when the masked figure, the specific person who would return on February 1st to take Nancy, visited her property for the first time, assessed it, observed the camera, confirmed the target, and returned weeks later to execute the operation. This is not the behavior of a crime of opportunity. A crime of opportunity is committed by someone who identifies a vulnerable target in the moment and acts impulsively. This crime was planned, surveilled, rehearsed. The prior visit is the surveillance phase. The February 1st visit is the execution phase, and both phases are in the FBI's evidence record. Both were captured by the camera that someone tried to destroy. Both are in the enhanced images that Coffindaffer says exist and that the FBI has not released. Now let me go to Barbara Butcher's full assessment. Because the forensic pathologist's theory deserves more than a summary headline, it deserves the full context of what it is saying and why it matters for how this case is understood. Butcher is not speculating. She is applying the specific knowledge of a career spent understanding how people die and what the absence of communication means in kidnapping cases that do not resolve the way their architects intended. She said Nancy was probably targeted by a local worker who assumed the family was wealthy because of the connection to Savannah, a tradesperson, someone with legitimate access to the property in the weeks or months before February 1st. Someone who saw the house, saw the neighborhood, made the connection to Savannah Guthrie, and decided that the mother of an NBC anchor was a viable kidnapping target. This theory is consistent with the prior visit evidence. A tradesperson with a prior legitimate visit to the property would know the address, would know the layout, would know the camera positions, would have had the opportunity to assess the property's vulnerabilities during the course of ordinary work, and would have had a reason to return, not because they selected the address randomly from the neighborhood, but because they already knew it from a prior visit in a different context. The specific horror of Butcher's theory is in the second part. She said that after time, when there was no valid ransom demand or any information forthcoming, it's probably likely that Mrs. Guthrie died of shock, fright, heart disease. Very soon after being taken, Nancy was 84 years old with a cardiac condition requiring a pacemaker. The specific physiological reality of a violent abduction, the terror, the physical handling, the loss of her home environment and her medication, the specific stress response of an 84-year-old cardiac patient subjected to acute trauma in the middle of the night, is the specific context in which Butcher is making her assessment. The pacemaker went silent at 2:28 a.m. The ransom communication infrastructure that followed, the Bitcoin wallet, the notes to television stations, may have been the kidnapper's attempt to manage a situation that had already gone catastrophically wrong before it even began. Butcher said, now this kidnapper had nothing, and probably took her body into the desert and buried her. The desert around Tucson is vast. The Sonoran terrain that stretches from the Catalina foothills toward the border with Mexico contains areas that have not been systematically searched. The kidnapper who had nothing, whose ransom operation failed because the victim did not survive the initial trauma, had to make a decision about what to do with a body in the desert. The YouTube content creators who have been walking through the terrain. The Madres Buscadoras de Sonora who have been searching south of the border. The Catalyst Center with ground-penetrating technology. Steve Moore's observation that geography will matter when remains are eventually found, all of it pointing toward the same desert landscape. Butcher's theory does not require a conspiracy. It does not require a sophisticated criminal organization. It requires a local worker who made a catastrophically wrong calculation, who believed that kidnapping the 84-year-old mother of a famous person would produce a financial outcome, and who panicked when the operation immediately went wrong, and then buried her in the desert. That specific, horrible theory is now in the public record from a credentialed forensic investigator who has spent her career at the intersection of violent death and evidence. And the 125-day silence of the ransom communications, the empty Bitcoin wallet, the notes that produce no sustained, credible negotiation, is consistent with exactly the scenario she describes. The investigation continues. The DNA is at Quantico. The genealogy process is active at Estrella. The blockchain is being traced. The enhanced images exist. And somewhere in the Sonoran Desert around Tucson, if Butcher's theory is correct, Nancy Guthrie is waiting to be found. Day 125. The images exist but haven't been released. The prior visit is documented. A forensic expert said Nancy probably didn't survive long. And the desert holds what it holds. The investigation is still building. The processes are still running. And the name of the person who did this is somewhere in the evidence, in the 50,000 tips, in the genealogy database, in the blockchain ledger, in the enhanced images that the FBI has produced but not shown. One call, completely anonymous, $1.2 million, 1-800-CALL-FBI, tips.fbi.gov, 520-351-4900. We will be back tomorrow.